Hi everyone! Today we're working on lesson 2, cube roots. This is very similar to yesterday's lesson, except we're working with cube roots, which you might not have heard of before, but just like taking a square root is figuring out what number times itself gives us that number underneath the square root. We're doing the same thing here, except it's that same number multiplied by itself 3 different times. So let's get started with our notes for today. Starting in this week's folder, this is lesson 2, so I'm going to open up the Tuesday folder. Clicking on your notes for today. Today is lesson 2, cube roots. Your learning target is, I can describe what it means to take the cube root of a number and solve linear equations with cube roots. So this is very like the last lesson on square roots. We may have seen cube roots before, but what does a cube root mean? A cube root is the inverse operation. Remember, inverse means opposite of cubing a number. So what that means is if we cube a number, that means we're raising it to the third power. So the exponent is a 3. It is a number when multiplied by itself 3 times, it gives you the original number. So 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. That means that 5 cubed is 125. So if we're finding the cube root of 125, that means we would get 5. Our symbol is very similar to the square root symbol. So we're going to go into insert equation. And if we go under the same operating button as the square root, you'll see the one right next to it. It's got a little n before the square root. And you'll see there's a little space for you to type in our 3 that represents our cube root. And again, I'm just going to put an X underneath that square root symbol. So that, or I'm sorry, cube root symbol. I do that a lot, so be careful to say cube root. So if you have a calculator that is like the ones we used in class, to type the cube root, you are going to press the number 3, and then you're going to press second, and then you're going to press the caret button, typo right there. The caret button looks like that little arrow key. It's right above the x squared button. That will be fixed by the time you get to your notes. If you are going to use the calculator that's on your Chromebook, it's a little trickier to use it this way. So let's say we're doing that 125 again. You type in the number that you're finding the cube root for first. So we type in 125. And then the button that you press is this one right here. Okay, there's a little X outside of what looks like a square root symbol and then a Y underneath it. So we're going to press that and you're going to see nothing happens because we have to type what kind of root we're finding, and we're finding a cube root. So we have to type in the number 3. Then you press equals and we get 5. So I'll say that one more time. You type in the number that you are looking for, 125. You press this button right here. And then cube root is 3, and then equals, and that gives you our cube root. So the cube root for 125 is 5. Let's go to some examples. It says evaluate the expression below using your calculator. If your answer is a decimal, round to the nearest tenth. One other thing I forgot to mention is how to do the calculator cube root on the fancy graphing calculator. So to do it on this calculator, you're actually going to press the math button, and then you're going to scroll down to number 4, and you should see the cube root symbol right there. Press enter and it will pop up in your screen. So again, if we do the cube root of 125, we get 5. Back to our examples. So we just did this one a couple of times, so we know the cube root of 125 is 5. All right, now let's do the cube root of 300. So I actually prefer the graphing calculator with this just because there are so many steps with the scientific calculator Chrome extension. So I'm going to do the cube root. You can just type the number 4, and that's going to be of 300. And we get a long decimal. Looks irrational to me. So we're going to round to the nearest tenth, so that would become 6.7. All right, pause the video and do 3 and 4 on your own. All right, check your work with my work. Very similar to with square roots, we can also leave cube roots in our final answer to show an exact answer. Sometimes, instead of rounding, we leave our answer exact. That means that we leave the cube root in the answer. So solving equations, we're going to do some solving equations just like we did on lesson 1. So to solve equations with cube roots, you follow the same steps. So make sure each side of your equation is simplified. So combine like terms and distribute. Number 2, get your x's on one side of your equation, constants on the other by doing the opposite or inverse operation. And 3, leave your answer as a cube root if your answer is irrational. You're basically leaving your answer as a cube root all the time unless it says to round. So let's take a look at my example here. So it says, let's take a look at my example here. So it says x cubed minus 3 equals 92. So remember, the opposite of cubing a number is taking the cube root. Okay, so we want to get x by itself here. So we add 3 on both sides. We get x cubed equals 95. To undo a cube, you take the cube root. So when you take the cube root of a cube, this cube root and the 3 as the exponent, those cancel out. We're just left with x equals. Now you should type this into your calculator to see if it's going to come out nice. So you type in 3 second caret button, or you can do the other options on your other calculators. And I see I get a crazy long decimal. That means it's irrational. So I'm going to leave it as that cube root because it says nothing about rounding. Okay, so I actually want you to try 5 and 6 on your own. I believe you can do it. All right, check your work with my work. Hopefully these weren't too bad. The first one is just a 1-step equation. The second one was a 2-step equation. And that's all I have for today's notes. If you have questions, make sure you reach out. Other than that, make sure you self-assess for today's lesson, and we'll see you tomorrow for tomorrow's lesson.